What object contained arguably the deadliest poison of the 19th century, causing countless deaths while also being the inspiration for a design revolution that would shape art history into the 20th century? What chair artisans? Today we are discussing the armchair history of Victorian era wallpaper. In the Victorian period, wallpaper was used widely by the working classes and the aristocracy alike. It was on walls in Parliament, churches, stores, and in every home save the most destitute. It was so ubiquitous, it was considered a silly fad by the haughty-taughty elitists, especially towards the end of the 19th century. But wallpaper has a long history.
Wallpaper was invented by the Chinese, but not adopted in Europe until the 16th century, and was predominantly used by the merchant class for lining cabinets, pantries, and such.
Eventually, it began to replace tapestries on walls as decorations by the French, hence the original name paper hangings. But it was still far too expensive for everyday people to afford. But alas, technology would lend a hand in democratizing access to wallpaper. In 1799, the Fourdrinier machine was invented in France and improved and patented in England, which used a cylinder to form paper, enabling it to be created in continuous rolls instead of sheets. It wasn't until 1817 that Thomas Gilpin invented his mass production paper making machinery in the United States of America, after sending some agents across the Atlantic to report back on the technological advancements in paper making to aid him in the design of his invention. Interpret that emphasis how you will. Mass production of wallpaper began in the late 1830s, early 1840s. In 1839, Potter and Ross filed a patent for the first wallpaper printing machine in England. I also found an account from a paper in Atchison, Kansas from November 16, 1887, where a gentleman by the name of R.C. Barnes was interviewed about his place in history as the first operator of a wallpaper manufacturing machine in the United States. The article states, quote, "The first machine was made by Burton Weld of Trenton, New Jersey, about 1837, for Christian Wells of Poughkeepsie, New York. It was not patented, but kept in a locked room in secret and was operated by Mr. Barnes." Okay, what's with people not patenting things and then doing this whole cloak and dagger routine? I don't understand this from a business perspective, and it seems to be very common during this time period, but I digress. Interestingly, the article also states that they were printing on sheets and not rolls until the Fourdrinier machine was invented. But that doesn't add up since it was invented 40 years prior, so maybe the reporter got her facts wrong. Maybe Mr. Barnes was misremembering these events had happened 50 years prior. We all know how unreliable eyewitness accounts can be, especially the more time passes. It is possible that when Mr. Barnes first started in cloak and dagger, it was on panels and then he transitioned to rolls. Conflicts like this remind me that history never has a hard, fast answer, even if it is published in a primary source like a newspaper. Another newspaper item published in the Boston Courier in 1842 discussed the newfangled invention of the wallpaper staining machine. I don't think we will ever know for sure the exact date manufacturing truly began here in Merry England or the continent, but we do know that much innovation in the field was taking place during this time period, and home decoration would never be the same again. Before mass production, wallpaper took an incredibly long time to make. It was made on sheets of paper using a wood block printing technique similar to a stamp. We can imagine how tedious this was. Placing the wood block on the paper, stamping it, letting the ink air dry before applying the next color, wash, rinse, repeat. Some details were even hand-painted. This process could take weeks depending on how ornate the design was, how many colors were used, how much wallpaper was needed. You can still buy block printed paper today of historic designs at specialty manufacturers. Thanks to the steam engine, with mass production, wallpaper was made by a series of rollers that would mark an impression of the design onto the paper with its respective color. In the early years, only very simple designs could be printed in a couple of colors. When they were first adopted, machine wallpaper was not that great. The colors and designs didn't align properly, quality was quite lacking. But like any new technology, one never wants to buy the first generation. Comparing this to block prints, everyone must have been thinking that these machines could never match the beauty, design, and execution of block printing. But over time, I dare say, they more than gave block printing a run for its money. By the 1850s, 8 colors were printed through the paper passing through the machine in one go. One machine could produce 54,000 feet a day. That's about 10 miles. Production skyrocketed from 1 million rolls in 1834 to 9 million by 1860. By the 1880s, paper could be printed in more than 12 colors, with designs increasing in complexity. And with the increased volume came decreased cost. Paper itself became cheaper due to the use of more inexpensive materials such as wood pulp. But for our dear friends across the pond, other factors were in play. In 1849, the Journal of Design and Manufacturers noted that cylinder printing could be even cheaper if it wasn't for the excise duty, which, quote, sadly impedes the use of paper of a better quality and is a tax both upon knowledge and good manufacture. It should be noted that this tax favored the more expensive wallpapers purchased by the wealthy and burdened the more affordable papers purchased by everybody else because this has been the case for the dawn of time. In England, this paper tax was repealed in 1861, which helped lower the cost of paper and opened the world of innovation as well as opportunity. The middle class was increasing greatly during this time period due to the Industrial Revolution, creating a new market for wallpaper. It was a boom time in the world of wallpaper manufacturing, and everyone was gaga over it. But the rise of machine-made wallpaper didn't please everyone, least of all, the critics. Picture it, London, 1851. A young, handsome man mounted an exhibition of the latest and greatest innovations of the age from the world over. Great minds gathered to share, to learn, to celebrate, and, humanity's favorite pastime, to criticize. That man was Prince Albert, also known as Queen Victoria's first cousin husband, and the event was known as the Crystal Palace Exhibition of 1851. England failed to get top honors in the wallpaper category, and this was the siren call to crisis mode. Everyone wanted to mimic the French and not the English. Something must be done about this. This had long been an issue in English artistic worlds, with the government even funding schools of design to train artists on taste, as well as educational exhibitions to enlighten the public on what good taste is. These didn't make much of a dent though. People loved their cheap wallpaper designs. And what was so detestable about them? Well, let me tell you. Machine-made paper was seen as cold and without artistry, and its images were not deemed suitable to the medium of decorating walls, for some reason. Block printing, on the other hand, was seen as an art form made by flawed human beings with skills. No two prints were alike due to the human touch. It took time to make block-printed wallpaper. It wasn't produced in a flash by some pulseless, steam-powered contraption. It was better because it was imperfect. Its prints had simple patterns with a flat perspective. This is how wallpaper should be, not the monstrosities displayed at the Crystal Palace. It's like buying frozen lasagna or jarred sauce. Sacrilege! Less was more to these wallpaper Luddites. One shouldn't print birds as they are in nature, but as simply as one can to convey the form, for example. These all-knowing art critics wanted to do something about this. The perfection and detail afforded by the engraved rollers of the cylinder machines was seen as tacky and unsophisticated. Also, the themes and motifs popular with buyers of mass-produced wallpaper was seen as passé. And what themes were these? Trompe-l'oeil, architectural scenes, landscapes, murals, any hint of dimensionality or realism.
To clarify, the reformers had two criticisms. One was the manufacturing process. Block printing was superior. And secondly, the motifs and themes chosen as the subject matter, regardless of the manufacturing process.
With the advent of mass production came a dearth of patterns, motifs, and themes. Critics saw this expansion of choice as a degradation of artistic standards and brought down the reputation of English-produced wallpapers, especially in light of their never-ending rivalry with France. One must always outdo the French, as they say. All of this came to a head at the 1851 Crystal Palace exhibition. Among the art world luminaries spearheading the reform of wallpaper design was William Morris. He not only had issues with the tacky wallpaper and its sterile perfection, but with the entire industrial age, as did many. He feared the loss of jobs and, most importantly, the art of knowing how to make stuff with your hands. In a word, craftsmanship. I don't want to think about how much wisdom and know-how has already been lost through the ages. And I think we can all relate to this as well because of the technological revolution that's happening right now. Screens are abstracting us more each day from concrete
concrete reality. AI replaces human interaction now entirely almost. Robots are replacing humans on factory floors. I want to work with my hands to remember that I don't have to be perfect. Imperfection is our signature, and I should embroider that on a pillow and sell it. And the apprentice, journeyman, master career path is all hinged on learning from our elder, more experienced fellow artisans. In other words, an old bag like me. But I digress. William Morris started his firm Morris & Company in 1861 with other artists such as Dante Rossetti, Ford Maddox Brown, and Edvard Burne-Jones, sparking the arts and crafts movement, which focused on the revival of older techniques and the manufacture of handmade objects. Look at William Morris as the godfather of the movement, if you will. The arts and crafts movement was a precursor to the Art Nouveau movement at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. Morris's designs were meant to marry what the masses wanted with good artistic taste, because, his taste rules all. Common motifs included whimsical depictions of more mundane and prosaic plants and flowers, such as honeysuckle, lilies, willow tree branches, pimpernels. But there kind of was a problem. His wallpapers were block printed, which meant only the wealthy could afford them. So while he was trying to help his fellow man, he was really just making beautiful things for rich people at the end of the day. Most of the other design reformers were producing papers via block printing as well, so it didn't really move the needle on the public's taste or buying habits. Big surprise of botchagaloops. But William Morris has another claim to fame in our little tale of Victorian wallpaper, but this one is far more sinister.
In the May 3, 1862 edition of the British Medical Journal, an item in its medical news section discussed the mysterious deaths of 4 otherwise healthy children from the same family. A post-mortem was conducted. No evidence of disease was found. The only item of note was the inflammation of the stomach and abdomen in all 4 children. This, coupled with inspection of the surviving family members, as well as the children's environment by Dr. T. Orton, led him to conclude the children most likely died from arsenic poisoning, caused by the green wallpaper in their home. Arsenic was everywhere and in everything in the 19th century. Flypaper, dresses, books, fake flowers, soaps, cosmetics, confectionaries, candles, beer, medicine. It was impossible to avoid. It was like the microplastics and forever chemicals of today, unavoidable and ubiquitous in the environment. Dr. Orton calls out the green color because it was long known by this time that Schliel's green, an emerald green pigment common in wallpapers as well as fabrics since the early 1800s, contained arsenic, so he thought that the green wallpaper was the culprit. By this point, it was far from medical consensus that the green wallpaper, or any wallpaper for that matter, was even remotely hazardous. Arsenic poisoning often was misdiagnosed as diphtheria. Many physicians only became aware of the hazard when they themselves fell ill to their walls and wrote letters in medical journals sounding the alarm. Dr. William Hines wrote an op-ed in the Medical Time and Gazette in February 1857 detailing his own experience with illness via wallpaper in 1849. Hines also identified Schliel's green as the culprit. While there were many letters such as this populating the columns of medical journals, there were just as many questioning this assumption and believing it to be nothing but poppycock. Arsenic was everywhere and in everything. Surely it was a coincidence, they argued. Some even conducted their own experiments, supposedly proving that arsenic cannot contaminate a room, as there wasn't enough arsenic present to cause harm, and because it would have been physically impossible to taint the air. A color manufacturer was interviewed by a newspaper and said his workers were in direct contact with the pigment and were in perfect health. Others argued it was only the cheap paper where you could scrape the color off easily where the poisoning could occur. Perhaps Dr. Hines was ill from burning gas lights in his house and not from the wallpaper. Every physician had an opinion, it would seem. But alas, the good Dr. Orton was correct. It was the wallpaper, but he was wrong about the specifics of transmission. Transmission occurred via dust particles touching the wallpaper. Children especially were vulnerable because they would touch the paper, put their hands in their mouth, or they would actually just lick the paper or chew the paper directly. And the air. Yes, but it wasn't confirmed until 1891 when Bartolomeo Giosso, an Italian scientist, discovered that a poisonous vapor was created when the arsenic combined in the wallpaper paste to create a mold that excreted a gaseous fume, which then transmitted the poison. Also, it turned out that it wasn't just green pigment that contained arsenic. It was found in every color of the rainbow. So avoiding the green wallpaper, a tip found in many a periodical of the day, would not save you from the hazard. In 1858, Dr. Alfred Owen Taylor presented evidence to the House of Lords on the poisonous levels of arsenic in manufactured products in support of the Sale of Poisons Bill, stating that the largest quantity of arsenic used in England came from the manufacture of wallpaper. Some samples of wallpaper contain nearly 50% arsenic, but alas, arsenic failed to be regulated by the government. In fact, it wasn't until 1900 that the state of Massachusetts in the United States passed a law limiting the amount of arsenic in papers and woven fabrics. So half a century and only one state in America had passed any kind of laws. Like, crazy, but not surprising. Despite the lack of laws, though, there were efforts made to warn the public about the dangers of wallpaper. A prominent example is from 1874, when the State Board of Health of Michigan released the pamphlet Shadows of the Walls of Death, warning the public about the dangers of arsenic poisoning in wallpaper. It included swatches as well as case studies and what could be done to remedy the situation. It states that one should replace the wallpaper in their homes, and if they don't, tear off the old wallpaper to kind of shellac over the old wallpaper before repapering to kind of seal in the dyes, which, as we know from Giosso's gas, would not do anything. The only way to truly rid homes was to tear out the old wallpaper completely, and many didn't do this, and they simply papered over it again and again and again. Of course, while the governments in the UK and the US were not stepping in to help curb the scourge, wallpaper manufacturers began labeling paper as free from arsenic. But aside from a few earnest purveyors, many were just using this as marketing, since sales started declining once the public grew concerned. There were no guarantees that paper was free from arsenic, even if the manufacturers who believed that the pigments used were actually arsenic-free. The wealthy were able to have their paper laboratory tested, because, of course, but everybody else had to just trust the marketing. I found a newspaper article from as late as 1900 that prescribed some home tests, such as burning the paper to see if it smelled like garlic, without inhaling the fumes, of course, or by pouring hydrochloric acid over a green hue, and if it turned blue, then ding, 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 we have a winner. Neither of these tests seem comprehensive nor particularly safe, so yeah. It wasn't until the 1890s, early 1900s that the majority of wall hangings, about 60 to 70%, were arsenic-free. In 1904, the U.S. Department of Agriculture issued a report comparing wallpaper arsenic levels from analyses done in 1883, 1891, and 1901, once the Massachusetts law had passed. It found that the percentage of wallpapers without arsenic actually declined. I think this is most likely due to the improved sensitivity of the tests conducted, because they could measure the arsenic in smaller and smaller increments. And it's possible that that 60 to 70% number was inflated because of this. However, it did find that 99% of the papers complied with the law versus about 95% in 1891. The report also suggested that the legal limit set by Massachusetts should be even lower, which was achievable since over 90% of papers were already at that lower threshold. So while the law did have an effect, it was really the customers' pocketbooks that led to this reform rather than government regulation, since most of the heavy lifting in reducing arsenic levels had already been done prior to the passage of this law. So now back to our friend William Morris. What does he have to do with these Victorian walls of death? Well, he came from an incredibly wealthy family that made its millions mining, that's right, ladies and germs, arsenic. Conveniently, he didn't believe all the panic mongering by the do-gooder physicians writing their op-eds, stating in a letter to a friend in 1885, quote, "As to the arsenic scare, a greater folly is hardly possible to imagine. The doctors were bitten as people bitten by witch fever." He also wrote to this same friend in a subsequent missive, quote,
"Of course, it is proving too much to prove that the Nicholsons were poisoned by wallpapers. For if they were, a great many other people would be in the same plight, and we should be sure to hear of it."
Well, everyone was hearing and talking about it, you botchagaloop, especially by 1885. Can you believe this person? And then comparing the physician's hysterical women a la the Salem witch trials, it's really just absurd. I think he really had a really major blind spot here, and he was in denial about it, conveniently thinking to himself, well, my family fortune couldn't possibly cause tons of people that die. Anyway, it is certainly ironic that the man who started designing wallpaper to reform its aesthetics denied the need to reform the materials used in its manufacture, whether by man or machine. Despite this hypocrisy, William Morris's wallpaper designs are much beloved today and are still available for purchase on not only wallpaper, but on many print-on-demand sites. So on anything, cell phone cases, even on placemats. My mother got me these. I relish the fact that these are mass-produced by machines and computers. Mr. Morris must be rolling in his grave. This poetic justice gives me the warm and fuzzies inside, I cannot tell you. Thank you so much for joining me on an armchair exploration of Victorian era wallpaper. I look forward to more historic crafting misadventures with you presently.
Okay. You like how I used the dress as a pretend blanket?
Yeah.